Hi, I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I'm going to be working on a 2002 Toyota 4Runner. This is a 3.4 liter two-wheel drive. The problem is on high speed braking, the whole car vibrates. So that's indication of the front rotors being warped. So what we need to do is to replace the front pads and rotors. Okay, these are the tools that I'm going to be using for this brake job. Half-inch drive impact, 21 millimeter socket, a hammer, two different types of punches, a blowgun. This is a bottle of water with a hole in it so I can shoot water out of that. And I made this plug out of a vacuum hose to plug up the brake line. Long nose plier, water pump plier, ceramic brake grease, anti-seize, small screwdriver, the 17 millimeter wrench, 10 millimeter wrench, and a 10 millimeter tubing wrench, rubber hammer, a pry bar, and my Phoenix brake bleeder. These are the parts that I'm going to be using for this job. Going to be using rotors, brake pads, brake fluid, and brake clean. And when you order rotors, they're going to ask you if you have a 15-inch wheel or a 16-inch wheel, because that's going to determine the diameter of the rotor. On this vehicle, I have a 16-inch wheel. Okay, there's two different types of calipers, yeah. There's one that's a floating caliper, the whole caliper slides, and then a fixed caliper that doesn't slide. And this is the fixed caliper. It's a good design, but it's a bad design that they don't make these anymore. But what it is because it doesn't slide, when you get the pads in, the piston will actually go in and out when your rotor is warped, and that's what causes the vibration problem, especially at high speed. And when it gets even worse, sometimes at low speed, you're going to feel this thing start pulsing. Okay, first what I'm going to do is loosen the bleeder screw. It's easier to loosen it now because the caliper is mounted. Just loosen it, because we're gonna have to bleed it later. Okay, so I gotta remove this wire. I'm gonna have to push this thing down and push it through. Okay, then we gotta take this wire out of the pins. These guys are all rusty. Okay, so we're going to be removing these two pins. How we do that is I'm going to be hitting it with a punch from the back and punching it through. And then this is your anti-rattler clip. So you got to make sure it goes in this way, not this way, but it has to go in this way. What it does, when you put it this way, it pushes the pad towards the bottom, because your wheel is going to be rotating counterclockwise. So it's going to be pushing the pad down. If you have this thing the wrong way, this is going to be pushing the pad up. So what's going to happen is every time you step the brake, the pad is going to go downwards and it's going to hit the caliper and it's going to make a clicking sound every time you hit the brake. So make sure you put this thing on the right way, this way, when you're assembling it. Okay, now it's really an option. If you want to squeeze these pads in and pull out the pads, you can do that. It's up to you, either that or you can just take the whole caliper off. But I'll go try and push the pads back in. Okay, we turn the wheel all the way to the left. That way it makes it a lot easier to work on and a lot easier to film. We're going to be removing this brake line right here. So first I'm going to be removing this clip right here. So I'm going to be using a small water pump plier to just remove this clip. This mounts or secures the brake line to the mount. So now I'm going to remove the brake tubing from the caliper. So after I remove it, the brake fluid is going to start coming out. For some cars it comes out quite fast. So what I did was I made a little plug. I got a vacuum hose. I just stuck a bolt inside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug up this brake tubing so this brake fluid doesn't come out, so the master cylinder won't drain out. Now we're going to be removing this whole caliper. So there's two mounting bolts over here, 17 millimeter bolts. So I'm going to remove that and remove the whole caliper assembly. Okay, so I'm going to be removing these two caliper bolts using a 17 millimeter wrench. Remove the rotor. So now I'm going to be compressing these 4 pistons in using this water pump plier. So I have this pan over here. As I'm compressing it, the brake fluid is going to shoot into my pan. So make sure you compress it all the way in. If you don't, then your new pads will not fit. Make sure everything is in all the way. Okay, that's good. Before I install the rotor, I need to clean it. So with this brake clean, we're just taking off the oil from the rotor. The oil that they put on, that's just so the rotor doesn't get rusty while it's in storage. Okay, so before I put the rotor on, I'm going to put some anti-seize around the hub so the next time it won't get stuck. It's a good idea to do it to all rotors. Then I'll get 2 nuts to screw it in just to secure it against the hub. Okay, before I install the caliper, I'm going to lubricate the caliper, these ends. I'm going to be lubricating with some ceramic grease. Sometimes when you buy the pads, it comes with some kind of grease. You can use that, whatever comes with the pad. Then I'm going to lubricate the piston, the metal part of the piston, all 4 of them. Just give it a real light coat. Okay, so now we're going to install the caliper. Okay, so we're going to be installing the caliper mounting bolts. So now I'm going to secure the brake tubing to the caliper. Okay, before we make it tight, we're going to be putting in the lock to hold up here. We're going to be installing this lock to secure the brake hose. Okay, now we can tighten the brake line that goes to the caliper. Okay. So this is the old pad. This is the new pad, the thickness of the new pad. If you look at it, the new pad, the old pad still looks pretty good. But the problem is the old rotor is warped. So anytime we're going to change rotor, we always change the pad, because this pad is actually worn to the old rotor. You can't tell with your eye because you're dealing with thousandths of an inch. It might look good, but if you get a new pad on an old rotor, you're not going to get 100% contact. You might get only 50%. You cannot really see with your eye because, like I said, we're dealing with thousandths of an inch. So you always change the rotor, either resurface or replace the rotor, but I recommend replacing the rotor. Don't resurface it. These are the new brake pads that I'm going to be installing. On the inboard pad, the sensors is right here, the two sensors. So this one goes on the inboard, on the inside. This is the outboard pad. How you can tell is the sensor is right here. So what you need to do when you put it on, that sensor has to be, they call it the leading edge, because this would be the trailing. So you always put the sensor on the leading edge because this one is turning counterclockwise. So before we install it, I'm going to be putting on some ceramic grease in the back. Not on the pad, but the back of the pad. Just put some on like that. Same as with this guy. Let's put a little bit on. You don't need very much. Put that guy in. So I'm going to be installing this bottom pin first, but I want to show you there's a little hole right there in the pin, and this wire is what's going to go in the hole, and that's what's going to hold the pin in from sliding out. So first, before we install the pin, we're going to lubricate it. Just lubricate. You don't do the whole pin, but only where it touches the caliper. That's all you need. So now we install the bottom one first. Then we're going to put this clip on. Then we're going to lubricate the top pin. Then we're going to put the top pin in. And this metal piece has to go underneath the pin. Just line up the holes. Make sure this piece is on the bottom. That way it's pushing the pad down. Okay, so what you need to do with a long nose plier, you got to turn the pin until you see those holes. Then you put the pin in. In there. And then this center piece, you just got to tuck it in the hole. Make sure these wires are in the hole. You don't want this pin falling out. Okay, everything looks good. Okay, so now we're gonna be bleeding the brake system, but because we took it apart, there's gonna have a lot of air inside the system. So what we need to do is get out as much air as possible initially. So what we do is you open up the cap to relieve any kind of vacuum, and in this case we have enough fluid. If your fluid is really low, you better add some fluid inside, because what I'm going to be doing is going to the bleeder screw underneath the car. I'm going to be opening it, and I'm going to let gravity push the air out. And once you get brake fluid coming out of the bleeder screw, then you can tighten it up. So you got to make sure that this thing doesn't go dry, because if it goes dry, then you're going to get a lot of air in your master. Then it's going to be really tough to get out. So now I'm going to be opening up the bleeder screw to let the air out. Once the fluid starts coming out, then with my rubber hammer I start tapping on the caliper, and if there's any excess bubbles inside, it's going to come out. So right now you see, only fluid coming out, which is really good. So we took as much air out as possible. So now I'm going to tap the caliper. If there's any air in there, sometimes it comes out. But there still is some air, very little air in there. So right now you only got brake fluid coming out, which is good. So what we're going to do is we're going to tighten up the screw. Okay. So now I'm going to suck out the old dirty brake fluid. Suck out as much as you can. Okay, so that's the best we can do. So put the cap back on, but we don't make it real tight. You just put it on, because what we're going to do now is we're going to be flushing out the brake system. I'm going to be using a Phoenix brake bleeder to flush the brake fluid from the caliper up to the master. Okay, so now I'm going to be flushing out the brake system, the front brake system. Whenever we do a brake job, we do them in pairs, either 2 front or 2 back, or 2 front and 2 back. And usually when we bleed the brakes, we always bleed the brake that's the farthest from the master to the closest. So in this case, the passenger side is farther than the driver's side. So I did the passenger side already, so now I'm going to be flushing out the driver's side. Okay, that should be enough. Now we're going to tighten up the screw. Okay. So now we're going to have to remove the brake fluid again from the brake reservoir, because when I pump fluid from the caliper back up to the master, it filled up the master. So right now we're just removing all this old brake fluid. Remove as much as possible. Just remove the best you can. So now I'm going to fill it up with fresh fluid. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start up the car, push the brake pedal down, pressurize it, and open up the bleeder screw to make sure there's no air. So now I'm gonna start up the car and I'm gonna start pumping the brake to seat the calipers. So when you pump the brake, you don't want to pump it to the floor. Just pump it about halfway. That feels good. Now I got a lot of pressure. So what I need to do now is, because I do it all by myself, I'm going to be using the hood prop to push the brake pedal against the seat to pressurize the system. Now I'm going to be opening up the bleeder screw. Right now I have the brake pedal pressured, so I'm going to open up the bleeder screw and make sure there's no air in the system. Oh, right, that's pretty good. There's no air. Lock it up. Okay, so now I'm going to be checking for leaks. So brake fluid is water soluble, so I'm getting some water and I'm just going to shoot it on here. Get all that brake fluid off. Then I'm going to blow it down with air. Get it all nice and dry. Then I'm going to go into the car. Then I'm going to be pressing down the brake pedal with my hood prop. Okay. So now I am pressuring out the brake system, maybe about 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna look for leaks. We disconnected this guy and then we opened up this guy, so those are the only two places that we really got to look for leaks. And it looks really good. It looks dry. If it's wet, then you're gonna have to tighten it up some more, but in this case it's perfectly dry. So now all we gotta do is put the wheels on and make sure I have enough brake fluid. Make sure you top off your brake fluid in your master cylinder and then road test. Okay, so now I'm going to be removing these two wheel nuts. And today I'm going to be using this pry bar. It's a little longer pry bar because we have a bigger tire today. The bigger the tire, the longer that pry bar gotta be. So instead of lifting the tire up and putting it on the wheel, eventually you're gonna hurt your back. So you gotta learn how to work smart. Use a pry bar to lift it up. Put it on. And it takes practice. I've been doing this for a long time. So it looks easy. Okay, so now I'm going to be tightening up the wheel. What we're going to be doing is using a crisscross pattern. That way it's going to be tightened up evenly. So usually I use my knees, kind of secure the bottom. Okay, if you start jamming it down from the start, you know, one here, one here, one here, one there, you start jamming it, then what happens is you start warping the hub and the rotor. Then you're going to run into pulsation problems again. So what you need to do is just snug it down evenly, crisscross, and then after that you can tighten it up. Okay, I road tested the car. No pulsation problems. The brakes feel really good. If you like watching more of my videos, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and I see you in the next video. Aloha.